There's a lot that involves economics when it comes to wage increase. That's why we're being joined on the program from our Abuja studios by the Executive Director, Data Fights Foundation, Mr. Joshua Olufemi. Mr. Olufemi, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
From your analytics that we're privy to, we saw that between 2019, which the minimum wage was agreed at 30,000, to now, inflation has gone up about 200%. And by your estimation, the right thing to do should be over 100,000 naira at least as minimum wage in this conversation. Maybe you help us break it further down on how you came about these numbers.
Okay, thank you. Typically, as you would see in some climes, for instance, the United Kingdom, annually you look at the inflation rate and then you use that to revise your minimum wage or your minimum wage, as it were. And if you look at the 2019 value, which was 30,000 naira, and you look at the inflation, annual inflation figure for 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023, you will see that by now we'll be playing around between 80,000 and 102,000 naira, for each year. For instance, in 2020, the inflation, had gone up to 11.4 from 2019, 11.4, and that would have, increased the value of the minimum wage to about 33,000 naira. By 2020, moved up to 13.25, which meant that it will have gone up to 44,000. And if you, roll it down, by 2023, it had gone up to 24.66, which meant that at that point in time, you should be paying about 76,000 naira. If you look at the Q1 inflation figure, which is 33.69, and you use that, to do the calculation or revise, you will see that we should be having about 102,000 naira as the minimum wage at the moment. So it's just a function of looking at what the figure is year on year, but multiplied by, the ratio of the inflation every other year, and then you have the figure that we are speaking to. And, that is something that I feel has been the sentiment that you have out there saying between 100 and 150,000 naira is what you should be having.
But even in the light of the circumstances, I wonder if you think that 100,000 naira will be ideal for a family of, an average family of 4. That was one of the arguments that we started having at the beginning of the program, in the light of the increase in the pump price of petrol, which doesn't seem to be, relenting.
So it depends on how you're looking at it. I mean, following the conversation that, Kayode was making the other time, if you have a family of, 6, the couple and the 4 children, you may say that's not a good figure to work with. But if you then look at, on a daily rate, how much will 100,000 plus make for a 22-day work, you see that you're playing with around 4,500 a day, which is something that you would say might be, what you can live with. There is in normative economics, you would say what should be or what ought to be, and there is what, in, real economics, or if you like, what should really be. What should really be, based on inflation is what we said is 102. If we're going by the sentiment, and even initial analysis that Data Fight had done, we had said it should be about 464 if we were looking at the GNI per capita of Nigeria, which essentially was what we saw, that an extra 30,000 was added to by the, by the Labour Congress to say we want 494, which was very close to what, nations, if you look at our, GNI, which is our gross national, input, you will see that you should be around 330 to 50,000 naira is what you would, by our productivity as a country, you should be looking at. However, what you should look at is federal government is only employing less than 2% of the entire population. And some of the conversation we've already had before, even the 30,000 states are unable to pay because they are not generating the level of output, if you like, that, the whole economy is generating, and all that put together would then be why you feel like, okay, if you've had this level of inflation, you can or could, have an affordability within 100 and 150,000 naira.
Okay, so we seem to have come up with at least a round figure on this side of the divide. But on the other side of the divide, and I'm talking the governments, federal and state, they are sticking to plus 60,000 naira. And plus 60,000 naira is very tricky because 61,000 naira is plus 60,000 naira. 65 is, 100 is and the rest. But it looks like they are dragging their feet when it comes to obviously reaching this minimum wage that labor and, economists have come up with. So the question is, why are they doing that? Is it as a result of them not having money to pay? A lot of people will say no, because they've seen how governments spend money. The labor leader we had here talked about the SUVs, the lifestyle, and all of that. So for a lot of people, the answer is a clear no. But that's why we brought you. You see the figures, you see what the budget says, what is appropriated for salaries, how much we can accommodate, where we can get money from. So we want to play around with the scenarios this morning and say, if we were to say 100,000 naira or plus that, where will government get the money from?
I think I lean more to people saying government is able to pay. If you look at the 2024 budget, the entire personnel cost was put at about 7 trillion naira. But if you zero down on just salaries and wages, that was about 4 trillion naira. And going by what the Minister of Information and National Orientation had said, that to pay 494,000 naira would mean that the government will have a wage bill of about 9.5 trillion. Now play the midpoint. The midpoint of that would mean that with 100 and 120,000 naira, the federal government will probably just need about 1 trillion naira extra on salaries and wages to be able to match its bill. Now, where can you get that from? If you look through the budget, 2 scenarios can play out here, or 3 even. First one would be, do you want to groom your deficits, or do you want to groom your debt repayment and negotiate with your creditors and say, how about we reducing what we are paying this year by 1 trillion naira? That's not a good one to do, because you're also thinking of sustainability. The other way is to look at your contingency funds, what you have within the service-wide vote and all the other things that government had already, included in the 2024 budget. For instance, just looking at the service-wide vote by the Federal Ministry of Budget and National Planning, you see that there is already about 200 billion naira, stock for capital project contingency. That's something that you can explore. You also have, some other things that if you look at even the vice president, the president, the state house, some of the expenditures that they have lined up, the renovation of, and constructions of, offices in Lagos and other places where, they operate from. If you look at all of that, I think that the federal government can still have about 1.3 trillion naira, that they can take from the 2024 budget. And the third scenario would be, look at the budget implementation, scenario. As of today, I'm not sure that federal government has spent 50% of what it set out to spend, which means if you have not spent 50% and you're already in June and you're looking at making up for extra maybe 500 to 600 billion naira, you have you have a runway that is enough for you to survive for the rest of the year. I think that there is information out there that the president himself is already saying he wants to go, back to the National Assembly and, present the supplementary budget. So I don't think that there's a problem with paying if you look at differentials.
All right, Femi, we're going to come back to you to look at the variables in that argument and what should hold true. But I want to touch base with some of our correspondents who are following up on day 2 of this industrial action by the labor unions. First up, we'll head to Kano State to speak with our correspondent, Sadiq Ilyasu. Sadiq, maybe you help us, bring us up to speed. I can see where you are, literally no vehicles, so the city is dry, but you are in a better position to tell us what's going on in Kano.
Well, it's actually not that dry. I'm actually standing away from the street, the actual street. You can show them the street. You can see a lot of people moving around. Normal activities are going on, but that doesn't mean that the strike doesn't affect the activities in the state. Since yesterday, a lot of banks have shut down, offices, the secretariat also shut down, no water at all there, and only a few banks, let me just say one bank that was operating, and the members of the union went there and ensured that they shut it down. However, the private schools, most of the private schools in the state are actually working. And because, you remember last week, we had a lot of crises with regards to aviation sector, and the person has completely shifted its activity to the court. But unfortunately, yesterday we were expecting to see the court, especially the Federal High Court, speak on the case, but due to this desperate action, it didn't happen. And even today, as I'm telling you, we are expected to have an event at the government house, which the governor is going to force a lot of people on education. But because of the industrial strike that affected the domestic flight in the country, the government has to postpone the activity. Even the governor, as of now, is in Abuja because he doesn't have a flight to fly down Kano. The event is imposed. So this is the case, and now it's time about them.
All right, Sadiq, thank you for your reporting. Whatever development comes up, we'll touch base with you. That's our correspondent, Sadiq Ilyasu, reporting from Kano State. Let's head back to our Abuja studio now, to Mr. Joshua. Joshua, I wanted to bring to the fore some of the argument or the variables in the argument and what you should speak to. Some have argued that if labor is paid what they're asking for, it will cripple the economy. Others are arguing that affordability and sustainability should be a factor. Labor is arguing about economic reality. Others are also pushing that it's going to push inflationary numbers even higher. So where should we be looking at when we consider all of these variables to see how we can come to some level of agreement that will not make labor continue in their hardship, as they say, and government to suffer the impact of not being able to pay?
So essentially, there is, all the facts are historical, facts always show that when you increase the minimum wage beyond, the average, it will always translate to some kind of inflationary effect, right? But you're already in a situation where, the headline inflation, the core inflation, the food inflation is quite high already. I think we already have a year-on-year food inflation that is over 14.6%, which means that, the price of most things are already tripled. And if you're looking at that, which is one of the reasons why we said, look at something that is almost three times or 4 times what you already have. So if you pay people about 120 to 150 minimum wage now, for the people who work with government and with the assumption that the state and, the private sector are also able to match up with it, I think you have something that you can say is fair. In terms of sustainability, I think you then need to look at various global variables. You always know that the volatility of the oil price will always impact, the revenue of government in Nigeria, which then has a spiral effect on its fiscal policies and also its monetary policy. The other is also to look at, the realism of any value that the labor is asking for. If you're asking for 494 for minimum wage, it means that if you go 3, 4, 5 steps higher for for everyday person, there is I mean 3, 4, 5 levels in even in the federal civil service or even in the state civil service. The value is not going to be, is not. I don't see any state government being able to pay realistically, this figure. Even Lagos State will have to struggle through it. However, whatever it's set, I guess the most important thing is for every tier of government to pay attention to productivity. How do we ensure that you are not just paid this minimum wage as civil servants, but you're also contributing to productivity? How many of the ministries and departments and agencies of government really bring back money is another question to really ask. And so for me, I guess the fair value or the realistic value is between 100, between 150 to 200. I mean, depending on who's calculating.
Well, you perhaps partly answered the question I was going to ask, which is the state's viability to pay. For instance, Kaduna State has at 2021, its wage bill was 498 billion naira. And, Jeffrey took us through earlier how some states are dependent on federal government allocation by about 90%. So if, for instance, federal government approved 100 billion naira, where are you looking at in terms of IGR or other forms of revenue of the states to be able to afford this the new minimum wage?
I guess it will be a call for, for revenue drive for state government who, of course, because the minimum wage, that the current minimum wage is very convenient for anyone to pay, which then allows them to do all the, other lavish spending that is being done. I guess this will, bring back the question of what are the resources that you have that you're not exploring? What are your comparative advantage in terms of natural resources, services that you should be able to offer that you're not offering? I'll give you an example of some of the states that have, like Kaduna that you were mentioning. There are a lot of natural resources that I think can be, you can do a lot of fiscal and monetary policy mix to help you generate 2x what you're having. And I think if you take that to other what I like to call the K state, Kogi State, Katsina State, Kano State, these are states that, I mean, by the resources that they have, are able to generate more than what they're generating, but have been, comfortable because the minimum wage favors them, or all their wage bill is something that they can handle even with FARC, as it were. There are states, in the country that are practically not doing anything in terms of resources. Even tax revenue drive is really, nothing to write home about. I feel if we increase this, it brings, it makes the work of every governor or even the local government councillor, it gives them a reason to demand the right revenue. And you always know that the higher the minimum wage, the higher the income, the higher the taxes that government is also able to collect, across sectors, both public and private sector.
Some would say, in these parts that fingers are not equal. So we have Edo State, for instance, already paying 70,000 naira. So after we get past this negotiation, do you see a variation in what states will be able to pay eventually?
Absolutely. I mean, even from what they already generate, you will know that many of them can meet up. But the question will be, how do you want to? Where do you want to go from that point, right? If Edo State is already paying 70, like as you mentioned, it means it will be easier for Edo State, to match 100,000 compared to a state that is struggling to pay 30,000. Taking even just doubling your wage bill means that you also need to double. All the streams or outlets where you make money from. And that's, I feel like all fingers are not equal, which means you will probably need to do much more than what you're already doing to make money.
Mr. Joshua Olufemi, thank you so much. Joshua Olufemi is the Executive Director, Data Fight Foundation, joining us from Abuja studios. We'll always come to you when we have to make sense of all of these numbers, because at the end of the day, we're looking for a way to move the economy forward. Thank you so much for coming on the program.